John Bolton, is determined to see the overthrow of two governments right now, and that is the Iranian government and the Venezuelan government. So let me say a little bit about Iran, and then we can open it up for discussion on any of these issues. You might all be aware that one of the most, in fact, the signature achievement in foreign policy for the Obama administration was the Iran nuclear deal. And that's a deal that took a long time to negotiate. In fact, it started way before Obama even came into power. And John Kerry, who we might fault in a number of things, did an absolutely incredible job in this negotiation. And they came to an agreement in 2015, and that agreement was signed by the Obama, but it was also an agreement with the Europeans, the French, the Germans, the British, the Russians, and the Chinese. It was approved by the UN Security Council unanimously, and it was unanimously approved by the European Union. It had world support. And people in Iran were dancing for joy the day that that agreement was signed. They told us there when we went there, they said it was one of the happiest days of their life. They were out on the street, music blaring, dancing, thinking, this is going to be the end of our suffering, because they were already under sanctions. And this means our reintegration into the rest of the world, particularly the Western world. And it's important to note that the Iranians love the United States. No matter what their political views are, they love the United States. When you're there as a tourist, and we were there very obviously as Americans because we had on shirts that said, Americans for peace with Iran, we love Iran, that kind of thing. And so people would come up to us, and there were people who liked their government and people who hated their government. But a couple of things were consistent. So they loved American culture. The young people, many of them speak English because they watch American movies all the time. They love American music. Of course, they love sports. And the very conservative religious folks love America as well. They think it's they have a lot of affinity with some of the religious community that's been going for years, like the Mennonites. Quakers have been going. And I be an American Jew, and they love Jewish people. They do. I mean, the conservatives say we're the same book of God, and we've got the same this and that, and the same all need, and all of this. And the secular people talk about how they love Jewish movies and Jewish humor and this and that. So there's a real love for the American people, but they feel so betrayed by the American government, so deeply betrayed when Trump came in and ripped up that Iran nuclear deal, because all the hopes they had just faded, and because they knew they were going to be hard hit economically. There was no relief in sight to them, and they also knew a couple other things. One is that the hardliners inside more hostile relationships with the United States. There's a crackdown inside. And they knew that it was going to be difficult to continue to make the kinds of reforms that many of the groups inside Iran were trying to make. And when that Iran nuclear deal was ripped up, it also proved that the hardliners were right, because the hardliners had always said, don't trust the United States, don't trust the devil, don't trust them, don't make a deal with them, don't even have these talks with them. Why should we? And of course, they were right, and they were also right in saying, why should we be negotiating around us having a nuclear program? They insisted, by the way, one of the worst visits we had, because we're all like anti-nuke people, they insisted that we go to see their nuclear program that was for medical research. We said, we don't want to see it, we don't want to go there. And they said, we want you to see, it's for medical research. And they said, why are we being forced to a standard that other countries are not forced to? Why does the US get all the nuclear weapons it wants? The Russians have their nuclear weapons. And why, talking closer to the region, why do India and Pakistan get their nuclear weapons? And then, of course, they ask about Israel. And Israel and Saudi Arabia were the two countries that never wanted the US to have a deal with Iran. And so when Trump ripped up the deal, it vindicated these people who said, don't trust the West, don't work with the West, don't lower our national pride by negotiating something that others don't have to live up to. You know, if Israel doesn't have to join any kind of inspection regime, why do we have the most onerous inspection regime in the world, where the International Atomic Energy Agency has certified now 14 times that Iran is still keeping to the deal, despite the fact that the US left. And there is something in Iran that I think is stronger than anywhere else in the world that I've seen, and that is national pride. It's an incredibly proud country, maybe to a fault, but they say, we count time in thousands of years. We're a culture that's thousands of years old. You're little babies in the US, but little bullies. But we have thousands of years of civilization. And they don't like being told what to do. And they don't like that the US is now at the height of imperial hubris when they reimpose the economic sanctions tighter than they've been before, to say to the world, not just the US companies can't trade with Iran. That's not what they're saying, which would be bad enough. They're saying no companies or countries around the world can trade with Iran if you want to use the US dollar, which is the international currency. You know, the SWIFT system where the international finance is all goes through something called the SWIFT system. That's all in dollars. So you can't do international financial transactions. You can't do business with any US company if you're going to do business with Iran. You can't have a ship come to US ports if it goes. You can't buy Iranian goods if you want to do any business with the United States. Now, Iran has 80 million people. It's quite a large country. But compare their economy to the US economy, and it's nothing. So if you're a company that's being given the choice of dealing with the United States or dealing with Iran, what are you going to pick? So when the US pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, there were all kinds of companies that had been negotiating after the deal was signed to have multi-billion-dollar deals with Iran. And Iran needed all kinds of things. One of the most important things was parts for their antiquated airplanes, their commercial airplanes. And it was scary, let me tell you, taking domestic flights inside Iran. And people are scared taking domestic flights because their planes are really, really old. And they're very innovative people, but some of the stuff they really just have to import. And so all of these companies that had deals, big deals, multi-billion-dollar deals, Airbus, Boeing had a deal, Renault, Volkswagen, the Italian oil companies, they all, 20 years, were breaking our agreements. In the meantime, Iran said to the Europeans, wait a minute, you know, you made us negotiate this thing, we signed it, what are you going to do to stand up to the US bully? And so they took a long time. They said, oh, we want our companies to keep dealing with Iran, but they had no way to protect their companies. And then finally they came up with this, it's called a special purpose vehicle, INSTEX is the name of it. It's supposed to be like a barter system where the companies could do a deal, the money would be held in this special purpose vehicle, and it was not working. It still hasn't even worked. And the other thing is that humanitarian aid is supposed to be exempt from these sanctions, and Iran does produce a lot of its own medicines, but there's like 5 to 10% of the medicines or the ingredients that they don't produce and they need. And so everywhere we went, we had people telling us about a guy in the bazaar as we're walking around came up to us and said, "You're Americans. You know, we love Americans, but why is your country doing this to me? My mother has cancer. She, as of 3 months ago, hasn't been able to get the cancer treatment that she needs. At first we tried to get it from Turkey, but it's too expensive. We can't go there, we can't get it. And now she's gonna die because she doesn't have the medicines." And we heard this over and over again. Medicines for specific things, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, the kind of portable dialysis. They couldn't get these things. And so people are dying, a lot of them, because of the sanctions, even though humanitarian aid is supposedly not included. And the reason the humanitarian aid is not getting there is because the companies are afraid to deal with Iran, because the pharmaceutical companies, the shipping companies don't want to ship anything, the banking companies don't want to deal with the transaction, and the insurance companies don't want to insure. So, you know, the Iranian people are really stuck. And it was, we were, our delegation would go, but there are restrictions for Americans, unlike other people coming from other countries who can come as tourists and go where they want. If you're American, so you can go as tourists. Well, we didn't want to go as tourists. We wanted to have more of these people-to-people exchanges. So it took us a long time to get our visas. And we had 70 people signed up for the trip, but by the time the date came and passed and we still didn't have the visas and the uncertainty of everything, and then suddenly we had the visas and they said, "You have to come now." So we got 28 people in the end. But what was very unusual is that we got access that, you know, a delegation would normally not have. The first day the delegation came, we got to meet with the foreign minister, and we had 90 minutes with him. He's a brilliant man, and he's the one who negotiated the Iran nuclear deal. And he said to us that his reputation was on the line because he negotiated this deal. He said, "Yes, we can trust the United States. Yes, we can trust John Kerry." And he and John Kerry became good friends. And actually, something really interesting he told us. He said, "We decided in the Obama administration that we were going to begin talks. And our first talks are, what should we talk about?" And they said, "All right, let's go back to the Iran nuclear deal, because Iran said, we don't want nuclear weapons anyway. So that's going to be an easy one for us to negotiate. Let's do that first, and then we can talk about all kinds of other issues." And so he said, you know, here we were. We did negotiate. It was signed with the idea that there would be more talks about other things. And then Trump pulled out. He said, "My reputation has been shot. And he is being attacked as somebody who, you know, couldn't come through on what he guaranteed." And the day after we met with him, and he had this very heartfelt conversation where he told us a number of examples where they tried to work with the United States. He told us, and of course he said, "Please don't let people forget how you overthrew our democratically elected government in 1953. And he didn't say it, but we'll say it, which is there would never be an Islamic Republic today had that not happened. There would be a secular democratic government in Iran." But then he talked about, after the Iran, the revolution in 1979, he talked about all the different times that they had tried to talk to the United States, and he knows very well because when he was 26 years old, he was a student in the US and became like the representative of Iran here. And so he's been part of this for 40 years. And he gave examples after the US invaded Afghanistan and wanted to get the different factions together to talk about how we're gonna set up a new government. And Iran was actually happy that the Taliban were gone. They saw the Taliban as their enemy. All of these Sunni extremist groups are the enemies of a Shia government and a Shia country in Iran. And that alliance to be sitting down at the table for the US, and then Iran was pushed out of the whole deal. And he gave us an example around, he gave us a recent example around Yemen, where he said there was a deal where they got the Houthis to agree to stop the war a month after it started. And that this deal was negotiated, and the US was all for it, and the Saudis would not do it. And so the US pulled out. And Iran is the, because we could talk about plenty, recognize that the Sunni extremist groups, whether it's the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they're all enemies of Iran. Iran has been fighting them in places throughout the Middle East. If there is a country that should be aligned with the United States in the Middle East, it should be Iran. It certainly shouldn't be Saudi Arabia. And every time you hear a government official say that Iran is the #1 exporter of terrorism first sometimes they say in the Middle East and they often say in the world, you gotta say, stop. It is definitely not Iran. It could be Saudi Arabia. Israel does its fair share, and the US does as well. But it is not Iran. And the way that the US has the alliance, not only with Israel, but the alliance with Saudi Arabia, that's one of the most evil countries in the world. You might not have, you probably heard about, the Saudi role in the absolute destruction of Yemen, the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi that really kind of woke some people up who didn't care about all the people dying in Yemen. And then more recently, jailing the very women that had been fighting for the right to drive, and the Crown Prince, quote, giving them the right to drive and then putting those women in jail. And just last week, 37 people beheaded in one day. 3 of them, people had been arrested when they were 17 years old. One of them, a 17-year-old, who was coming to study in the United States at Michigan University, and he had been arrested for being part of a peaceful protest, and he was beheaded just last week. So this is an evil, evil regime that is spreading its perversion of Islam around the world, and the US is in bed with them. So when these reporters come and say, the Trump administration is doing what it's doing in Venezuela because it cares about the humanitarian crisis and cares about human rights, we just say, stop. We could talk about many other places, Honduras, wherever, but let's just talk about Saudi Arabia for a minute. And anyway, going back to Iran, the Iranians asked, why is the US in bed with Saudi Arabia, not us? Iranian policy aligns a lot more, or should align a lot more, with the United States. So we had a lot of heartfelt talks. We went to the Museum for Peace, which is a beautiful museum that has not only the history of warfare of Iran being attacked by Saddam Hussein. Iran was attacked by Iraq in 1980. A bloody, horrible, horrible 8 years of war in which hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Some say up to 1 million people were killed. And they also say to us, it's hard for us to forget what the US was doing during the Iraq war. And some of you are shaking your heads because you remember. The US was supplying the precursors to the chemical weapons that were used by Saddam Hussein on the Iranian people as well as Iraqi people as well. They were, the other thing they did is take this group now known as the MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq, some of you might have heard of, and Saddam Hussein brought them over to Iraq and trained them and armed them to go back into Iran. And they were the first suicide bombers. They would go blow things up, kill civilians, kill all kinds of people. Those people, the MEK, are the good friends of John Bolton, the good friends of Rudy Giuliani, the good friends of some of the Democrats as well. Nancy Pelosi has been sending them messages every year. These are terrorists, but they spent a lot of money, supposedly Saudi money, to pay people in the US government large amounts of money to be their guest speakers. John Bolton reported $180,000 to speak to them. And these people are hated inside Iran by just about everyone, because even people who really dislike the Iranian government see them as traitors, see them as terrorists, and say they are not fit to be any kind of alternative to the present government. And so the last thing I want to say before we open it up is that for Iranians that are looking at their own government and many things they want to change, we met many people. It's kind of funny, in one place, people feel open to talk to you about whether they like the government or not, in front of the minders. And even the minders, the people, you know what a minder is? Like somebody from a tourist group, like, who has to stay with you all the time. We became such close friends to our guides, nicer word. And they were telling us all the things they don't like about their government. They don't like that women have to wear a headscarf. But you know, two things. One, in Saudi Arabia, they have to totally cover up, not just a headscarf. And two, the headscarves now are like totally falling off their heads. Women have so turned it into a protest sign, actually, that it's quite remarkable. But they say people are openly complaining. We went to one roadside shop as we were going out of town to go to Isfahan and Shiraz and Persepolis and some of these just amazing, old, beautiful, beautiful places. And in one of the roadside shops, there were all the books of Donald Trump translated into Farsi. The books of Donald Trump in Iran. And we said, wow, that is really strange. So I saw a guy who was there buying the book, and I said, you know, why are you buying this book? And he said, I like Donald Trump. And I said, why do you like Donald Trump? He says, because I think he's going to get rid of this government. And he said it totally openly, totally there, you know, to me as an American, which says something that there is some openness and some play and some levels of freedom, whether they hated their government or didn't. It was not what that gentleman said. The message we got is, we are looking around the rest of the Middle East, and we see if our government were overthrown, it would be chaos. We might not like our government, but we don't want to be like Syria. We don't want to be like Libya. We don't want to be like Iraq. We don't want to be like Yemen. They say, show us a good place. There's nothing that good that comes right now at this present time of overthrowing a government in the Middle East. And so they say, it's much better for us if we can work, as we've been doing for 40 years, to reform our own government, to try to get rid of a lot of the corruption that's there, to try to lessen the power of the clerics. We also went into the Iranian parliament, which was fascinating. We got to meet a number of parliamentarians, including the ones that are designated exclusively for religious groups, like the Jewish community has a representative, the Assyrian community has a representative, the Christians have a representative, and
Zoroastrians.
Yeah, have a representative. The Baha'i do not have a representative. No, in fact, they are discriminated against. But they told us that we are constantly trying to make reforms in our government. There are now more women in the parliament than there are clerics, which they thought was a very good sign, moving in the right direction. And so many people told us, we are moving. This is not a static situation like in Saudi Arabia. This is a more malleable society, except when we are under the thumb, under the boot of the United States. And they say it will be total chaos here, and maybe that's what the US wants. That's what they think. And they say, we certainly think that that's what Israel wants, because we're a big country. We're an 80 million people country. They want to see us divided. And they say the US for a long time has been giving money to the different ethnic groups, and there are lots of ethnic groups inside Iran. And they're saying they're trying to foment. In Iran, I told you there's this tremendous sense of nationalism. They're trying to break that up just like the US fomented the Sunni Shia divisions in Iraq. They're trying to get people to feel more Iranian. When I was in Congress, I go to Congress all the time. One day we had a peace with Iran, called me over and they said, what do you mean peace with Iran? We said, yeah, we don't want to go to war with Iran. And they introduced themselves, and they were all different ethnic groups in Iran, and they were all here, invited by USAID, US government, NED, National Endowment for Democracy, and they were all being groomed, and really groomed to be more tied to their ethnicity than to the country. And so what people would say is they want this country to break up. They want us not to be a strong country in the Middle East. They want us to be a weak country where we're all fighting among ourselves. And so that's what we left, with this idea that we had to come back and work against what the U.S. is doing. And so there are a number of bills in Congress, and it's been hard, let me tell you. It's not just the Republicans who are rabid against Iran, and they're really doing it at the behest of Israel and, to a large extent, Saudi Arabia as well. But there are a lot of the Democrats as well that are as bad on Iran. It's hard to find anybody who will stick their neck out on Iran. And thank goodness Bernie Sanders is one of the ones who has been doing that. There are two different bills in Congress right now, just like there are bills around Venezuela. There are similar ones that say the Trump administration does not have authorization to go to war without congressional approval. And that's about as good as we're going to get at this point. And so we're working for those bills in Congress, and we need to get a lot more support than they have right now. We are working more on these people-to-people ties. We have 2 more delegations going to Iran, one in September, one in October. And we think it's just really important to find more ways to get people to care about these issues. And thinking of that, I should probably just end with a quote. See if I just saw it, that somebody just sent me from Iran. And they said that we feel that the wars in the Middle East have been going on so long that people in the United States have become immune to this, and they have lost their ability to feel, and they've lost their ability to have compassion towards us. And I think that is so true. So I know this is a community filled with compassion, and we have to think of ways to stop the next 2 wars, which are looming ahead of us, and that is Venezuela and Iran. Thank you.